This is the Zac Anesbury Show.
Welcome. Today's podcast clip comes from an interview with Professor Scott Koslow from Macquarie University.
A whole bunch of different kinds of papers into journals. And one of the things that's useful to think about the way that as a reviewer, you kind of, the paper you see often is a function of a very serious, intense academic working virtually alone somewhere far away in a dark office, okay?
Okay.
And they often don't talk to anybody about their research because, well, either they're afraid to talk to other people about their research, or more typically, most people don't care. All right? So they're sitting there, they're working alone by themselves, they have this really great idea, and they write it up and they send it off to a journal. And then 3 anonymous people sit there and criticize the paper. This is not a great system, okay? But it is the system that we have. So when you're writing a review, you just have to imagine they're this lone writer off somewhere who never talks to anybody, and this is where they're going to get the feedback. Your purpose as a reviewer is not to criticize the work, okay, and not to evaluate it. It's usually obvious whether or not it's really going to be really good work or not, okay? And it's not people think that it's hard to make these decisions about is this good enough. It's actually a fairly easy decision, and after you're familiar with the literature, you can pretty much say that's a winner, that's a no, this is a maybe.
After reading it once, or at what point?
It doesn't take a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can just skim the thing and figure that one out, okay? And the reviewers often really see the same thing over and over and over again. And you have 3 reviewers and they all think something very similar about this paper. But your purpose as a reviewer is not to make a judgment on the paper. Well, obviously you have to, and you have to say revise and resubmit, accept, go away, whatever it happens to be. But your purpose is to help that person do better research.
Okay.
That's it. Nobody can substitute for that. They're working by themselves. This is the way they get feedback, and this is the only feedback they're probably ever going to get.
Okay.
So when they send the paper, and sometimes they're sort of asking the wrong question, and you have to say, you know what, you really should be asking this question because that's the relevant one, okay? And tweak them towards that regards. And, sometimes obviously there's methodological flaws in papers. There actually aren't too many papers that come through with methodological flaws. It is more typical. It's like, why the stuff did they do that? Why did they ask that question? They could have asked something simpler and done something more powerful. This happens routinely. Or it's sort of like, this is really nice work, but they don't realize what they've got.
Yeah.
They're actually studying this other issue, not the issue that they think that they are. One of the biggest problems, and this is just one of many problems, is, say, they've got some scales that they use, multi-item scales, all fine and scientific, follows the academic traditions, but they misinterpret what their scales are. They call it construct X when you read the items, and it's like, no, that's construct Y, and so forth. You really have to be helpful. Much of a reviewer's role is to give away ideas. I still remember.
Wow. I've never heard of it that way.
To give away ideas.
Never heard of it that way before.
No, it is. I still remember I asked one of my colleagues, a very good colleague, to review a paper. And I was the area editor at the time. And so he went off, he wrote an incredibly competent review, criticized the paper for all the correct spots, and then that was it. Okay? And then I wrote the AE report. That and the other reviewers all said competently, this is what's bad about the paper. But my AE report, area editor report, was about how should you do better work. Now, that paper was clearly, it was going to be rejected.
Yeah.
It was not up to the standard, okay? But I went and said, look, these are the kinds of issues you should be focused on. These kind of methods are the kinds of things that you should be using. And I go through and I lay out the entire format. This is what you should be doing. Now, my colleague, he was in the same department as me, and after I had sent out the AE report, he gets to see the AE report and what the other reviewers' comments were and so forth. You never get to see who the authors were, of course. And he stops by my office and he says, Scott, you just pretty much told them, you did all the work for them. And it's like, no, they still have to do the research.
Yeah.
Okay? They have to go out and do this work. But you laid out the roadmap for them. And it's like, that's what we do. If you want to advance the field, that's what you have to do. Now, one of those, I can almost guess, one of those big Best Reviewer Awards, I know what I got it for. There was one particular paper, came into JAMS. It had a very interesting effect. The authors themselves couldn't understand why it was that effect. And what it was that, I'm trying to remember this particularly well, and I'm probably going to screw up and get a lot of the details wrong, but I'll go ahead and try it anyways. So what they were doing is they were looking at the effects of, I don't know what you call them now, sort of, who are they? They're sort of consultants that work in the finance industry. They make recommendations on whether or not they think firms are doing the right thing. And it's a, how do I say this? So it's a semi-finance paper, to whereas they were analyzing stock price returns, okay? And it was these analysts who seemed to have the effect, and that if the firms, they were the ones determining whether or not, when a company announced a new strategy, the announcement of the new strategy didn't seem to affect share price, at least until these analysts gave it a tick.
Okay, it's like an endorsement type of...
It's an endorsement kind of stuff, okay? And it's like, why was it these analysts that make the big difference, not the announcement of the strategy, okay? Well, one of the things that's about these analysts is they're largely allowed to go talk to folks in the firms and question them and the like. Ordinary investors can't, but they're allowed to. Yeah. And then they can go and make their recommendations. So pretty much who they have to appeal to is not the market in general, but rather to these analysts, because the analysts are sort of the gatekeeper of the information.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, the authors didn't get this. Okay? And I looked at it and it's like, yes, this is a two-staged kind of model. This is cool. And so what I went and did, I said, okay, guys, I'm going to write your introduction for you.
Okay.
Okay? And I sat there and I rewrote the entire introduction for them. Now, mind you, they went and they rewrote what I said. Okay? So it's definitely their paper. But I gave them an example of this is exactly what you should be talking about. Okay? And I laid it out. And it was going to be one of these papers that it's like, it's a really strong method, but these guys don't have a clue what they've got. Okay? They got something fabulous, but they don't know how to make sense of it. I told them exactly this is how you make sense of it. Okay? And I suspect it's for that one review that I wrote that I got the Best Paper Award, because all of a sudden it's like it went from being something that such a strong method, we don't want to reject it in the first round, but we don't know how it's going to progress to publication. And I laid out the roadmap. You do this. Paper did fabulous. Okay?
Yeah.
And that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to give away ideas.
Give away ideas.
And
I think because I'm quite early on in my reviewing academic career. I think I've reviewed about 20 journals now, roughly. And it's the first time I've heard of that type of approach. I've always tried to help the authors improve their work, whether I think that it should be accepted to the journal or not. I always try to give constructive feedback and to help them to understand maybe some flaws in their method or help them to see how they could write the paper better. But I'm going to take that approach from now on. I think that's really good. Let's see how I go.
Yeah.
Maybe by the end of my career, I would win a Best Reviewer Award.
There's sort of this idea of, and some people don't want to do this. They can actually think that, and they say, the data set's great. If they position the paper this way, it would actually fly. And there are plenty of folks I know that could say that about papers, but they won't say it in a review. And I'm thinking, why are you not saying that in the review? And it's like, oh, well, maybe that's a paper I should publish. And it's like, oh, for Pete's sake, you got enough work. All right?
Yeah.
There's always another idea.
science never ends. And I don't know any academics who are sitting around thinking, if only I had an idea. I mean, that's part of the reason I find professors like David Corkindale, for example, who still works here but is retired, hasn't retired.
Yeah.
It's because he has all these ideas that he hasn't done, and he's had a long career. Yeah. They don't ever end these ideas. So why do you need to this other one? Help someone else publish and advance the field.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a way better way of going about it.
And don't sit there and sort of hog your ideas and say, ooh, that's mine, that's mine. It's like, oh, for Pete's sake, we're in this wonderful field to whereas ideas are free, just give them away because there's always another better one that's going to be around the corner.
That's very true. And do you find that with like the supervision of PhD students? So like obviously you have to help them, guide them through finding and identifying a gap in the literature and moving them forward. So you have to also be not selfish in those ideas as well, and to share them and to help them move forward for their career. Is that similar approach?
Yeah, but I sort of got you made a phrase that sounded like fingernails on a chalkboard to me. Okay. And that was find a gap in the literature. Oh, for Pete's sake, you don't find gaps in the literature.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, fair call.
Don't even go down that route because then you're sort of filling nooks and crannies that are not the main thing that everybody's interested in. No, do not go down the route of finding the gap in the literature. You figure out what you want to do that's important.
Yeah.
Eventually, you'll sort of be able to figure out that actually was a gap in the literature. But that's not how you find the gap in the literature. You have to go some other route. And when you realize what you're doing is a gap in the literature, then maybe you know that you're doing something that's good. But it's not the way forward. It's the way that you know that you've arrived.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a really good way of looking at it, I think, actually. So you've I went to your presentation yesterday, and one of the things that you mentioned was all about the positioning of the story and giving, I guess, the reviewers, but also as the readers at the end of a story to go along with your data. You mentioned that quite often papers won't get rejected because of like method issues or anything like that.
Oh, well, they get rejected for methods issues.
But if it's strong, it's sometimes the positioning of the paper that sort of...
Yeah.
Did you want to give us an example there? You spoke yesterday about, you had a article that the reviewers didn't originally like the story.
Yeah, it was a qualitative piece. It was recent. A doctoral student, John Parker, really sharp guy, who wants to do some qualitative research on sort of message strategy in advertising. So most of it's on message strategy, and part of it's about insight. Beautiful data, lots of great interviews. I thought very insightful.
Hey guys, it's Zac Anesbury here with just a couple of quick reminders. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, then make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. There are plenty more interviews to come with some of the world's leading marketing academics and practitioners. You do not want to miss these. In the meantime, if you're looking for another way to connect, then follow me on Twitter at Zac Anesbury. That is ZACANESBURY for my take on the marketing issues of the day.